Okay, we are continuing our study on personal evangelism, and but I want to start with a quick story that happened here Sunday. Denise happened to be in the back, and as all of you know, I'm sure that the Rutledges, their last time attending with us was Sunday. Well, Ethan must have dropped Kendra and the girls off, and Andrew came in pretty excited. This was going to be his last time in class. So he goes to his class, and there's nobody there. He starts crying. So, I mean, think about that excitement of a young boy that he's eager to go to class. And when no one was there yet, because it was still a little bit early, that he cried. I mean, it disappointed him so much. I think that kind of sets the tone of what we're talking about in this class on Wednesday nights, personal evangelism. And how, while we should be partaking in meat, some of us still require milk because we haven't obtained it. We haven't picked it up. And I think the point of that, picking it up, is what we desire to do. Now, Andrew wanted to come to class. I mean, he couldn't wait because, he's excited he's going to move, but he's just, the eagerness in the youth. And then sometimes we get into that routine of, it's just Sunday. It's just Wednesday. I got to put in my time. And as Christians, when we think about what we're talking about, and we think about what's waiting for us, if we do that, are we eager? Are we that eager that, I know all of us who had snow days as kids when we were school age, when we had inclement weather, we hoped for that call that said, there is no school. I mean, we didn't, as much as we would miss, but we looked forward to that. Think about the Andrew who did not want to have a snow day for Bible class. And how are we as Christians? Do we want a snow day on the Lord's Day? Or do we want to be here? And I think that as we look at what we've talked about in this class, and I want to start then, let's look at 1 Corinthians chapter 15, 58. We kind of talked on it last week. But I want us to look at that again. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 58, "Therefore, my beloved brethren, be you steadfast, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as you know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord." So we kind of talked about it briefly last week, about that steadfast, unmovable, and what comes to your mind when you think of something that's steadfast, unmovable? A rock? I mean, I think of a rock. Nikki, you said? A mountain? Yeah, a mountain. I was on Route 7 yesterday, and I remember being down there years ago, and they would have roads run, this is on the river, and there would be landslides, and they would close a lane. Well, they're pretty much moving that out. Kikosin, your old company, is moving that so that won't happen. So not all mountains are unmovable. But yes, mountains, steadfast, unmovable. But think about that as Christians. That's what we should be. But what I want us to look at is then it says, always abounding in what? The work of the Lord. What is the work of the Lord? Because we, everyone in here that are Christians, we are supposed to be abounding in that. Now, what do you think abounding in that means? And we just talked about being steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. Excelling. Andrew was running into class. He wasn't just lollygagging, oh, it's Sunday morning, I got to go. I mean, Denise said, he was eager. I mean, he was ready. It didn't disappoint him. But he was eager. How many of us as Christians are eager for an opportunity? Always abounding in the work of the Lord. And then, for as much as you know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. What do you think of when you think of labor? Work. I'm an employee. Labor, pay. I put in time, I get paid. Unless you're the boss then you still, hopefully you get paid, but what do you think about when you think of labor? What's labor? It's work. And most of us who work, labor for a living, we earn a wage. And so when it's talking about here, and what Paul's talking about, is us Christians, we have a wage, don't we? Do we get it today? No, we get it. I mean, we get it in fellowship. Last week at Fort Hill, I'm sure there was a lot of rewards in the fellowship, the time that everybody spent as Christians. That's good. I mean, that's a reward that we receive here on earth. We don't work for rewards on earth. We wait for our reward there. But that's a nice little blessing to associate that much time with Christians. But our real reward, what we're waiting for, what we're working for, is heaven. But we have to be abounding in the work of the Lord. Now, I'm a salary employee, so I don't punch a clock. But at one point in time, I did punch a clock. And if my time card wasn't in the system for payroll, what happened to Ned Harold? I didn't get paid. I didn't get paid. No, because there's a requirement. They have to have a time. I mean, they might have still been there every day, but if I don't have that slip saying I was there, and I wouldn't have get paid, because that's not the way the system works. So when we think about as Christians, we can't look at it as a job, that we're going through the motions as a job. We have to do it in love. So if we're abounding in the work of the Lord, when we think about the work of the Lord, is love involved in that? Yeah, it's got to be, right? I mean, what was Christ? They put him to death, and what did he say? Forgive them. They know not what they did. Imagine when that man that was beating him, that was scourging him, that Jesus was humble like a lamb. You know, he wasn't cursing the man or threatening the man. He was humble like a lamb.
For the wages, I have all the cool things that I get that money can't buy as well, which is fellowship, prayer, able to be forgiven, joy, peace, God's love, hope.
Oh, no. I mean, we get there are many things that we receive as Christians.
Yeah, but as in doing the Lord's work.
Sure, doing the Lord's work. Yes.
I mean, money can't buy this.
No, money can't buy those things that and Megan just said. Say the list again louder so people can hear it.
Fellowship, prayer, able to be forgiven, joy, peace, and God's love and hope.
That's just a few. Yes. Yeah, there are benefits of being a Christian. So if we were listing that as a job, part of those benefits will be what Megan just said. One of the big ones is forgiveness, because we know we're going to sin. It tells us that in the Romans, that we'll all sin and fall short of the glory. But because we have that forgiveness, we still can earn that. Now, if I forget to turn in my time card and I don't get paid, whose fault's that? That's mine. Company's not forgiving and say, oh, well, Ned probably worked 40 hours, we'll just pay him anyway. That doesn't happen. The IRS, if you don't fill in your tax form, what are they going to say? Oh, I know Ned worked, we'll just send him a refund. It's not going to happen, is it? No. So it's the same way here, that as Christians, but when I guess the point I'm trying to make is that when we think about the work of the Lord and abounding in it, we're required to do some things as Christians. We're required to be a light that shines. We're required to be an example, to let our love, how people will know we're Christians by our love, to let that love shine, to have knowledge, always ready to give an answer. Those are things that we're required to do as a Christian. Now, do I have to have every answer? No. But I have to be able to answer a question with, I can get you an answer. I mean, we have to be able to at least speak intelligently to someone. Doesn't mean we have to have all the answers, but we have to be able to say, I'll get you an answer. And then we get them an answer. That's okay to do that. It's better that than to make an assumption, and that assumption be wrong. So it's easy to say, you know what? I'm not sure on that one, but I'll get a definite answer for you. And then we make a phone call. I remember years and years ago, Josh Votal was studying with somebody, and he sent me a text. Hey, what about this or this? I thought, is this really Josh? So I answered his question, because he was studying with someone. And that's what we need to do, is be able to give an answer, get an answer. But just we need to, if we're abounding in the work of the Lord, then that's what we're doing. We're abounding in it. We're representing, we're doing as Christians. And I think when we look at that with Paul, and it says that your labor not be in vain in the Lord. How could our labor be in vain? Don't get paid for it. Why wouldn't we get paid for it? Working for the wrong master. Who? Yeah, if I show up at John Deere, I'll really get, yeah. Yeah. No, Howie Cat wouldn't appreciate me representing John Deere. But yes, we have to make sure we're working for the right master. And who is the master? It says the work of the Lord, big L, Lord. So that's who we work for. That's who we need to continue his work. We talked in the very first class weeks ago about what is the work of the Lord. And the work of the Lord is think about what Jesus did in his ministry to start it, and then he left it open for us to finish. Megan? Sure. Sure. If people think it's the right time to have the WWJD bracelet on, then they'll wear it. But they could take it off pretty quick too, couldn't they? If they didn't fall in the right crowd, it can come off very quick. You know, you see people with the cross necklace or whatever. You always assume that what it's supposed to represent, but that doesn't represent the work of the Lord. What represents the work of the Lord is what we do with our life. It's the walk that we walk, the talk that we talk. That's what shows who we are. Because we can say one thing and we could do something totally opposite. But what people are going to recognize and see is what we do, the actions. And so we have to make sure that our actions match what we say. Did that work for Paul? Did Paul walk that walk? Yeah. Yeah. Because we know that Paul walked that walk. He was steadfast. He was unmovable. Once he was committed to Christ, he was committed to Christ. And in the same way, we can see it the way he persecuted Christians before. He had that same zeal. When he was focused in the right way, that zeal was turned around. So, two travelers met at a junction on the road that leads different directions. One of the travelers asked the other, "Which way do I go from here?" The other answered, "Well, that depends entirely on where you want to go. If you don't know where you're going, it doesn't really matter which way you go. Any road will take you there." So, as Christians, we need to know the path that we're on, that we want to be on. And we need to know how to get there and which way it goes. We talked in 2 Peter, one of our first weeks, we talked 2 Peter chapter 1, about 5 through 7, and we'll talk, so 2 Peter 1, 5 through 7. "But also for this very reason, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue, to your virtue knowledge, to your knowledge self-control, to self-control perseverance, to perseverance godliness, to godliness brotherly kindness, and to brotherly kindness love." So when we think about, those are things that we need to add to our faith. So if we're Christians, number one, we have to have faith. We have to have faith if we're Christians. And then starting with that faith, we add these things to it. And I want us to look at the perseverance. What's the difference between perseverance and stubbornness? Stubbornness. Yeah. Well, what's the difference between perseverance, being persistent, and stubbornness? Is there a difference? Mark's saying, yeah, there's a difference. Yeah, there is a difference.
You're believing what you say is right, but there's no changing your mind. There's no saying, look at it this way because it's.
Paul says basically stubbornness is, I'm right. No matter what you say, I'm right. That's being stubborn. That's stubbornness. So when we think about being Christians in that perseverance, notes, I'm sure you guys know this. He failed in business in 1831. He was defeated for the state legislature in 1832. He tried another business in 1833. It failed. His fiancée died in 1835. He had a nervous breakdown in 1836. In 1843, he ran for Congress and was defeated. He tried again in 1848 and was defeated again. He tried running for the Senate in 1855 and lost. The next year, he ran for vice president and lost. In 1859, he ran for Senate again and was defeated. In 1860, the WHO signed his name, A. Lincoln, and was elected the 16th President of the United States. The difference between his history's boldest accomplishments and his most staggering failures is often simply the diligence that will persist, to be persistent, to not take failures and let them label us as a failure. Could Abe Lincoln have been a failure up until 1860? That'd be pretty easy to classify him as that, wouldn't it? The average millionaire goes bankrupt 3 times. In today's time, 3 out of 5 marriages end in divorce. 61% of working Americans have been fired or let go due to downsizing. So when you think about things that happen in our lives and being a Christian and walking that walk, things will happen in our lives and around us. If you look at these statistics about marriage, most people then that we work with, there's going to be, if we work with a group of people, chances are divorce is in that group. People have had divorces. Maybe it's an opportunity for us to let our light shine, to help someone in a situation like that. So as Christians, when we think about diligently working, and some of the verbiage that Paul uses, steadfast, unmovable. In 1 Peter, Peter talks about diligently working on those things. That as Christians, sometimes we don't take those action. It doesn't apply to us. We just kind of slow and steady wins the race. Isn't that what some people say? Does that apply to Christianity? Slow and steady, you think? Do you think Jesus was slow and steady? I got 3 years to do this. We'll just kind of map it out, plan the easiest routes, try to make it easy. No, not at all. Not at all. What did the apostles want? They wanted stuff to happen right then, didn't they? They were probably a little bit more eager for something to happen. But so when we think about our Christian walk, we need to strive for that. And Paul, when he talks about that he hasn't obtained it yet, one of the in Philippians 3, 12 through 17, where he talks about working towards the goal. In verse 13, let's turn to that. Philippians 3. I think is a good illustration here. Philippians 3, 12 through 17. Paul says, "Not that I have already obtained or am already perfected, but I press on that I may lay hold of that for which Jesus Christ has also laid hold of me. Brethren, I do not count myself to have apprehended, but one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forward to those things which are ahead. I press towards the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Jesus Christ." What I want to talk about is there where he talks about pressing towards the goal. One of the Greek words there that it kind of refers to is straining towards. And so I think most of us, if we think about those, if you watch the Olympics, or you watch, probably the Olympics is what most of us watch. Most of us don't probably hang out at the track, meaning the racing track, not the horse race or car race. But when you see a 50-yard dash, what's the leader doing as he gets close to that tape? What do you see him doing? Are they leaning forward? to try to be the one that gets that tape? That's what it is here is that Paul's talking about. We're straining, that we're working towards that. Now if you're in the back of the pack, you're not leaning forward to anything. You just want to finish. But the one that's leading, he's straining towards that prize, to win, to take that takedown. And that's what Paul's talking about there when he's reaching for. So we can look at Paul's life and how Paul lived. And Paul said, I haven't obtained it yet. I still need to press on, like that runner. Press on to that. And so in the same way, we need to strain towards that finish line. Press on to the goal to win the prize. Okay, now let's go to another area. Any comments on that?
The whole striving towards your goal is like the same as being eager, like you said earlier.
Pressing on to the goal?
Yeah, you're eager too, like when you're like,
Yeah. Think about someone's demeanor when you're having a conversation. If somebody is just kind of... I have a granddaughter now, as you know, and one of the movies that she likes to watch is Zootopia. But one of the scenes in Zootopia is going to the DMV. And we all know when you go into the DMV, even in Zootopia, the DMV is like our DMV. But working at the DMV in Zootopia is the sloths. So, just slow. But think about people that we deal with. If we're Christians and we're letting our light shine and we're just kind of like, oh yeah, I want to tell you about Jesus. If that's how our demeanor is, if that's the light we're putting out, who wants that? Who wants to be around someone that isn't excited about what they represent? When we all deal with people, whether it's cars, restaurants, we deal with people, and the people that we like are the ones that are outgoing and how do we tip? Well, it depends on how that person treats us, right? When we go to a restaurant, the service that we get. You don't want a waiter or waitress who's all down and, just a terrible day, gloomy, takes you down, right? So, as Christians, we need to have if our light's shining, that light has to shine. We have to make it shine. We have to live that every day. But when we look at our life, is everything every day top of the world to us, for us? Paula says that we have a choice each day how we get up, how we live our life. And that's good. As a Christian, if we start our day every day in the Word and communicating to our God, how can it be a bad day? There can be things that happen that are bad, but if our mind is focused, if we're in the right frame of mind, like Paul was in bad situations, right? We talked about it in Sunday's class a few weeks ago. That when Paul was in prison, he wrote some of the books of the Bible. And he converted when he was in prison. So sometimes we're in a situation that may not be the best situation, but we need to take advantage of that situation and look for the opportunity. Because the opportunity could be there for us to let our light shine and to help someone in the time that they need it. Any other comments or questions? And Paul says it depends on how we look at every situation. But again, what I'm saying, though, is if we're a Christian, we ought to look at it a whole different than the world. Because even though this could be a setback in our earthly life, we have a bigger picture. We have someone who's promised us all things work for the better for them to the good that love the Lord and serve Him. So we know that, it could be bad here, but we know ultimately it's going to end up good. We just have to get through those times And that's where Christian families come in too, to help us in those situations, because we will have those situations in our lives. Okay. Now let's look at, in Acts the 17th chapter, what we want to talk a little bit now about is that we, as a group, as Christians, we must know God. And when we look at Acts chapter 17, we have in Acts chapter 17, we have verses 22 through 30. It says, "And Paul stood in the midst of Areopagus." Somebody say that for me. Areopolis, thank you. "And said, 'Men of Athens, I perceived in all things that you are very religious. For as I was passing through and considering the objects of your worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, To the unknown God. Therefore, the one whom you worship without knowing, him I will proclaim to you, God who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life, breath, and all things. And he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and their boundaries of their dwellings, so that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope him for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as also some of you, your own poets, have said, for we are also his offspring. Therefore, since we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, something shaped by art or man's device. Truly, these times of ignorance God overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent." So, when we look at that there is Paul, and where he is, they have all these altars, and they're worshiping all these different gods. Think about the world we live in today. Are there altars everywhere in the world? In the United States, in New York City, are there altars all over the world, all over the place that people worship? Yeah, there are, aren't they? Yeah, I mean, that's when you think about what we as Americans today worship, it's everywhere. But where it needs to be. Because we're not worshiping the right things like here. They weren't worshiping the right things. They were worshiping everything under the sun. And just to make sure they were right, they even had an altar for the unknown, which is what Paul was going to talk about. So in the world we live in today, we're like that because we have, as Americans, we worship everything. From sports figures, music, on and on. That we're missing the target because we're not worshiping the true God. Like Paul said, here's what. Because at that point, he talked about God, the ignorance he winked at. Or, do you think God's going to wink at the ignorance of our world today? Because what has America said to God today in 2017? We don't need you. That's what Paul has said. That's what we as Americans have said to God, is that we don't need you. We've got our own gods. Whether it's whatever it is. Dr. Phil or Oprah or whoever. We don't need God because that's just a book of fables. And what's going to happen on the judgment day? What's it say every knee is going to do? Every knee is going to bow. Because everybody will realize there is a God. And while they made fun of or ignored, their knee will bow. But then they will hear, what will they hear? Well done, thy good and faithful servant? No, they'll hear, depart from me. I never knew you. So when we think about we as Christians, we have to make sure that we know who God is. And the God that we serve and what we believe in. Because we're going to spend eternity. If we live our life the way he wants us to, we'll spend eternity. with God. But if we don't, we need to know that God's also a jealous God, but he's true. He tells us if we don't do what we're supposed to do, what's awaiting us? Is destruction, is fire, damnation, is hell. The picture's there. But we have to live that. We have to think about Paul and where Paul worked towards that goal. We think about an athlete, the way they work, the runners. We think of as a Christian, though, being abundant in what we're supposed to do. But are we really living that life as a Christian? I guess that's what the point I'm trying to make is, are we giving our all for that prize? Am I working for that God that Paul talked about, or am I just on the just kind of falling in with the crowd and worshiping the gods of today, TV, movies, whatever it is? And we know in the world we live in today, religious-wise, a lot of people have gone off the deep ends. And so when we think about our Christian walk and the lives that we do live, we have to live as commanded, as here, the pattern that we have here in the New Testament. It's a lack of knowledge of God that causes the bulk of immorality in the world. So most people, because they don't know that God, they think God as, how do they picture God? Just a big guy on a big white cloud and a big white robe with a big white beard. Kind of, he's good. God wouldn't do that. And know what people think? God's just a good guy. That's not right, is it? But that's what people want to believe. Well, God wouldn't send me to hell. I'm a good person, right? Isn't that how people think? But that's not the case. In 1 Thessalonians 4:5, 1 Thessalonians 4:5 says, not in the passion of lust, even as the Gentiles who know not God. So most of the world we live in today, most Americans today, don't know the God of the Bible because they don't study the Bible, because they don't want to believe. And when they get the opportunity, if it's TV or radio, chances are they're not going to hear the real Word of God, are they? They're going to hear blah, 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 blah. Send $25 and you're saved. But read this card and say this prayer and you're saved. That's what they see. If that's the only thing they see, is that the picture of God? No, it's not. But in the world that we live today, the only people that a lot of people see in the world as godly people are people who aren't godly people. True godly people. Megan?
When you're talking about, like, America doesn't, and then you're going...
I didn't say we don't need God.
I know, but it's like when you're watching TV, you're watching your idols on TV, and then you watch a commercial for this church thing, and then that's how they get you as well. It's like, that's really dangerous.
Sure. No,
And
it's
card is sending out for a free card to read this thing, or you're taking your card first of all, and then you're here. Like,
yeah.
But that's an issue with idols. If you're like on a Sunday, you're watching TV.
Satan wins when the world buys into their propaganda, his propaganda. And his propaganda is just pray this prayer and you're just say these words and that's not, there's nowhere does it say that. Sure, he throws out the false teaching because the world says, okay, I'll buy it. Sure. It's that easy. I'm a Christian. I read this thing on the TV last night, so I'm a Christian now. That's what people think. But that's not that's not Christianity. That's not what this book talks about. What Paul talks about striving toward, working towards, giving us an example of, is not that world we live in today. The religious world we live in today is not what Paul's talking about, pressing towards the goal. It's not what's going to get us to heaven. It's what the world says is okay, because it's not. We have to believe and be baptized for the remission of our sins. It has to happen. There's no other thing we could do. That's the only way we get access to the blood of Jesus. There's no other way. There's no other person that we can go through, just simply the Word of God through His Son. We've gone overtime, so you all get overtime pay tonight. Any quick closing comments or questions? All right, thank you.